In a remote research station perched on the barren surface of Variac 7, the wind howled, a constant reminder of the isolation that surrounded the facility. For years, this station had been Earth's primary outpost in deep space, far from the bustling cities of Earth. It was a quiet, scientific haven, until a signal had arrived. A signal from the stars, one that would change everything. Dr. Eric Thorin, a seasoned xenobiologist, sat hunched over a control panel in the station's main command center. His gaze flicked nervously between the blinking lights on the console and the large, empty expanse of space beyond the window. The air was thick with tension. Soon, very soon, they would have their first contact with an alien civilization. The transmission was coming from a craft that had entered Earth's orbit. "Do you think it's really happening, Eric?" Captain Lysandracor's voice crackled over the intercom. Her tone was sharp, but it was clear she too felt the weight of the moment. Eric didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and ran a hand through his dark, disheveled hair. He couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of excitement and dread. "I don't know. I've spent my life studying these possibilities, but to witness it firsthand, it's almost too surreal." The station was abuzz with preparations, but Dr. Thorin's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This alien was coming, but what was its purpose? Was it a peaceful envoy, or would it be the first step in a galactic conquest? Zorla, the alien in question, had come from a distant system. Her ship was a thing of beauty, a sleek vessel that seemed to shift in color as it glided through space. When it finally docked, the entire research team gathered around to witness the first meeting. Zorla emerged from her ship, a figure bathed in soft, radiant light. Her skin shimmered, a translucent bioluminescent shade of violet. She was unlike any life form Eric had ever seen. Her body was a fusion of organic material and something more ethereal, almost as if she were a living, breathing light. Her eyes, large and glowing, met Eric's as he stepped forward. The others were hesitant, standing back, their expressions unreadable. Captain Lysandracor was notably tense, her hand hovering near the weapon holstered at her side. "Dr. Thorin," Zorla said in a voice that resonated directly in his mind. No words were spoken aloud, yet the message was clear and intimate. Eric's heart skipped a beat. He felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary alien. Zorla communicated telepathically, bypassing the need for spoken language. "Welcome to Earth," Eric said, trying to steady his nerves. "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Zorla's tendrils of light shimmered as she nodded, her glowing eyes conveying warmth and intelligence. "I have come to observe and understand. My species seeks knowledge, not conflict." But the others were not as reassured. Captain Cor's voice cut through the silence. "We can't trust her. We don't know what she wants." Eric watched the exchange carefully. He was fascinated by Zorla's calm demeanor, but he could feel the unease in the air. The people of Earth had no idea what they were dealing with. "You're right to be cautious," Zorla acknowledged, her voice soft but firm. "But know this, my people do not seek to harm you. We want peace." As Eric studied her, a sudden realization hit him. Perhaps peace was possible. Perhaps this was a beginning, not an end. The others, however, were not convinced. Captain Cor eyed the alien suspiciously, and several of the other personnel whispered among themselves, their distrust palpable. Dr. Thorin, despite his skepticism, saw something in Zorla's eyes, a sincerity that none of the others seemed to notice. Maybe she wasn't here for war, after all. Days passed in the sterile and cold environment of Variac 7, and the research station buzzed with the aftermath of Zorla's arrival. Though humans had initially been cautious, the alien presence was becoming more difficult to ignore. Everyone was still on edge, except for Dr. Eric Thorin. He had begun spending more time with Zorla, fascinated by the intricate patterns in her bioluminescent skin and the calm energy she exuded. Zorla had shared fragments of her culture with him. Her people, the Valthorians, were ancient and revered peace and knowledge above all else. However, much of this information was filtered through the cold lens of science and strategy. The human delegation had placed her under careful surveillance, not fully trusting her claims. On the day that Zorla agreed to give a more personal insight into her people's history, Eric couldn't help but feel the anticipation building. He had been working tirelessly to translate the complex neural frequencies Zorla used to communicate. Her telepathic messages carried more than words. They carried emotions, ideas, and entire histories that he struggled to comprehend. "You are among the first to understand us." Zorla's voice echoed in Eric's mind one evening as they sat alone in a sterile laboratory. She had removed her protective exosuit, revealing the delicate, glowing tendrils that swirled gently around her form. The light from her body cast ethereal shadows on the walls, making the cold space feel somehow alive. Eric adjusted his glasses, distracted by her presence. He had been so used to dealing with biological data and tests, yet now he found himself grappling with something far more complex. "You speak of peace, but peace between us. It doesn't seem so simple. There's so much fear." Zorla's eyes seemed to soften, a slight ripple in her skin betraying her empathy. "Fear is a language of the unknown. It is natural." She paused, as if considering her next words carefully. "But my people know that knowledge can overcome fear. And that is why I am here." Though Zorla's words were noble, Eric could sense an undercurrent of doubt in her voice. She was hiding something. He was sure of it. Meanwhile, in the command center, tensions were escalating. The Earth Defense Fleet, led by Captain Lysandra Kor, was pushing for a more aggressive approach. Every day, more military personnel arrived, bringing with them the heavy weight of suspicion and distrust. Yet the delegation from Earth's government, led by the charismatic Elian Kova, was determined to find a diplomatic solution. Elian Kova had only recently arrived at Variac 7, and his arrival marked a significant shift in the negotiations. Elian was a diplomat known for his ability to see the nuances in conflicts, and his reputation had earned him the difficult task of establishing communication with the Valforians. However, his arrival was also met with resistance from many in the military and political spheres, who feared the consequences of peaceful talks with an alien species. He stood in front of the small, elite council of Earth's top leaders, arguing for diplomacy. "The choice between peace and war is never easy, but we cannot let fear and hatred cloud our judgment," he said with a calm authority. "Zorla and her people offer us an opportunity, one that we must not squander." Captain Kor was not impressed. She had always believed that the best defense against alien threats was a strong offense. "And what if they're lying to us, Elian?" she retorted. "What if they're deceiving us just to weaken our defenses before striking? We cannot let our guard down." Elian's gaze shifted to the large observation window, where Zorla's craft rested like a sentinel against the backdrop of deep space. "I understand your concerns, Captain, but sometimes it takes one person to make the difference. We need to give peace a chance." Back in the quiet confines of the research lab, Eric continued his work with Zorla. His skepticism had grown as he dug deeper into her words. Despite the calm and diplomatic exterior, he sensed something dark lying beneath the surface. Zorla had been careful not to reveal too much about the true nature of the Valforians. But Eric's instincts told him that there was more to this story than met the eye. As the days passed, Eric and Zorla spent more time together. The alien's light seemed to flicker and pulse in rhythm with her emotions, and Eric found himself drawn not just to her intelligence, but to her presence. Their conversations delved deeper into the heart of Valforian culture and history. Zorla's race was ancient, their civilization spanning eons of time. She told Eric about their vast knowledge and exploration of the stars. Yet, despite her knowledge and wisdom, there was an unease in her manner. It was as though she was afraid to speak of her people's darker moments, those moments that hinted at the tension between peace and power. One evening, as the two of them stood in the observation bay, watching the stars, Eric finally asked what had been on his mind. You've told me a lot about your people's commitment to peace, Zorla. But what if that peace is not as simple as you make it sound? Eric's voice was low, hesitant. What if your people have a darker side to their past? What if they're not entirely honest with us? Zorla's tendrils rippled, the glow fading for a brief moment. There are truths that are difficult to share, Eric, but I cannot hide from you forever. My people have made mistakes. We have tried to force peace onto others in the past, and it has not always worked out. Eric's heart skipped. This was the moment he had been waiting for, yet it filled him with dread. What do you mean? What kind of mistakes? Zorla turned her gaze away from him, her soft glow dimming even further. We sought to unite with other civilizations through force when they resisted us. It was a brief but dark period in our history. We have learned from it, but the scars remain. Some factions within my people believe that the only way to achieve peace is through control. Eric's mind raced. If what Zorla was saying was true, then peace could be an illusion. It could be that some factions within her people had manipulated Earth into a false sense of security, lulling them into complacency before seizing power. But Zorla was different. He could see it in her. She was genuine, a beacon of hope in a sea of uncertainty. Yet, if she was alone in this, could she convince her people to abandon their past mistakes? Before Eric could ask more, Zorla raised a hand, signaling him to be silent. It is not my decision alone to make. There are those who will oppose me, but I must try. I must make the choice to believe that peace is possible. As Eric stared into her glowing eyes, he realized that their journey together was only beginning. But the road ahead would be fraught with peril, not just from Earth's fear of the unknown, but from the shadows that lingered within Zorla's own people. What Zorla had started, they would have to finish together. The days following Zorla's revelation were filled with turmoil. The small team of humans stationed on Variac 7 found themselves torn between loyalty to their homeworld and a growing sense of camaraderie with the alien ambassador. Dr. Eric Thorin, more than anyone else, felt the weight of the choice Zorla had made to confide in him. Her words haunted him, echoing in his mind long after their conversations ended. Despite the unease that gripped him, he couldn't ignore the profound connection that had developed between them. In the corridors of the research station, Captain Lysandra Cor's distrust continued to fester, feeding the tension that simmered between the humans and their alien guest. Her military background had prepared her to be cautious, to remain vigilant against any potential threat. However, the more she saw of Zorla, the more she doubted her instincts. Zorla was different. Her presence was unsettling, yes, but there was an undeniable sincerity in her desire for peace. Still, Captain Cor couldn't shake the thought that something larger was at play, something that wasn't immediately apparent. On the other side of the station, Elian Kova, the newly appointed human diplomat, worked tirelessly to broker peace. He had arrived at Variac 7 with high hopes for a lasting alliance between Earth and the Valforians. His charm, intellect, and dedication to diplomacy had made him a valuable asset, yet even he felt the pressure mounting from all sides. The global political scene was becoming increasingly hostile toward the idea of peaceful relations with the aliens. Military leaders, including General Eric Trent, voiced their concerns loudly, and the growing support for preemptive strikes was becoming harder to ignore. Zorla, too, was becoming more deeply entangled in this web of politics. She had shared with Eric her people's history, of their rise to power, and their tragic attempts to control other civilizations for the sake of peace. But now, a darker truth was beginning to emerge, one that Zorla hadn't fully comprehended until recently. Her people, despite their advances in wisdom, were not immune to the temptation of power. There were factions within the Valforian leadership that still clung to the idea of controlling other races, manipulating them into submission under the guise of peace. For Zorla, it was a painful truth, one she had been afraid to face. Her mind had always told her that peace could be achieved through understanding. But now, she was confronted with the unsettling possibility that her people might not share her vision. Eric's heart ached for her. He had always admired Zorla's calm demeanor and her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace, but now he understood the depth of her struggle. Do you think that the rest of your people will listen to you? Will they choose peace over power? Zorla's tendrils pulsed faintly, and she closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching for the right words. I do not know. There are factions within the Valforian Council that believe control is the only way to bring stability, and if they have their way, they will manipulate Earth into submission, just as they have done with other civilizations. Eric's mind raced. The truth was more complicated than he had imagined. Zorla had arrived on Earth with the hope of fostering understanding and peace, but the reality of her people's internal conflicts threatened to undo everything. Then we have to stop them, Eric said, determination settling in his voice. We can't let your people turn this into a war. We have to make them understand that there is another way. Zorla nodded slowly. But how do we convince them? How do we show them that peace is possible without control? The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. It was Elian Kova, looking more somber than usual. He had been listening from the doorway, clearly aware of the tension in the room. I think I might have an idea, Elian said, his voice tinged with a new resolve. But we'll need your help, Zorla. If we're going to stop the factions that seek to dominate Earth, we need to show them the strength of our unity. We need to prove that we can stand together, despite our differences. Zorla turned to Elian, her eyes filled with doubt. But can you truly unite us? Can the people of Earth overcome their fear of the unknown and trust in peace? Elian's gaze was unwavering. I don't know, Zorla. But if we don't try, we risk losing everything. We can't let history repeat itself. The mistakes of the past cannot define our future. The weight of Elian's words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Zorla allowed herself to believe that peace might still be possible. Perhaps, with Eric and Elian by her side, they could change the course of history. But it wouldn't be easy. In the days that followed, the station became a hub of frenetic activity. Earth's leaders, along with Zorla, Eric, and Elian, began to prepare for a high-stakes summit with the Valforian Council. It would be a meeting like no other, a chance to negotiate, to try and salvage what little hope remained for a peaceful future. But even as they made their preparations, a shadow loomed over them. General Eric Trent, with his hardline military stance, was not about to let this opportunity slip by without a fight. The forces of distrust were gathering, and Zorla knew that every word spoken at this summit could determine the fate of both her people and humanity. As the summit approached, tensions between the factions grew. The Earth Defense Fleet mobilized, and Zorla found herself walking a tightrope, caught between her desire to forge a new path for her people and the relentless pressures of those who believed in domination through control. But one thing was certain. The time for words was almost over. Soon, Zorla, Eric, and Elian would have to face the ultimate test, the test of whether peace could truly prevail in a universe that was all too familiar with war. And they would have to face it together. The day of the summit had arrived. Variac 7 hummed with tension, the station's artificial atmosphere thick with anticipation. For the first time, the fate of both Earth and the Valforian people hung in the balance. Zorla stood in the observation bay, her glowing tendrils pulsing softly as she gazed out at the stars. Her heart was heavy with the weight of what was to come. This was no longer just a diplomatic negotiation. It was a battle for the future of her people, and for the future of humanity. Eric entered quietly, his expression serious. You're ready for this, Zorla. We've prepared everything we can. You have our support. Zorla turned to him, her eyes glowing with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I have your support, Eric. But I fear that it may not be enough. The factions within my people are powerful. They will do anything to maintain control. I believe in you, Eric said, his voice steady. I believe in what you're trying to do. You've already shown us that peace is possible. But it's not just about your people anymore. It's about all of us. Zorla nodded, grateful for his unwavering belief in her. But deep down, she knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. Even as Eric spoke of unity, the harsh truth was clear. The two sides could not simply agree on peace. They had to fight for it. The summit was being held in a high-security chamber, deep within the heart of the station. Representatives from Earth's government, the military, and Zorla's people were gathered around a massive holographic table. Tension radiated from every corner of the room as both sides exchanged wary glances. Captain Lysandra Kor stood by the door, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Her presence was a reminder that even in the midst of diplomacy, military power was never far behind. Zorla entered the room alongside Eric and Elian, her form more regal than ever. Despite the internal turmoil that raged inside her, she held her head high. She was more than just an ambassador now. She was a symbol of hope. As the door slid shut behind them, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. The human delegation was led by Elian Kova, who spoke first, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "We are gathered here today to ensure the survival of both our peoples. The future of Earth and the Valforian civilization rests in our hands. We must decide whether we will let the mistakes of the past define us, or if we will take a step into the unknown, toward a future of cooperation and peace." Zorla stepped forward, her bioluminescent skin pulsing softly. "I come not just as an emissary, but as a representative of those in my people who believe in the possibility of peace. The Valforians have made grave mistakes in the past, mistakes that I, too, have struggled with. But it is time to change. We must evolve beyond the cycles of control and conquest. We have learned, through suffering and loss, that true peace can only come through understanding, not domination." General Eric Trent's voice cut through the air, sharp and dismissive. "And what if your people are not as willing to change as you claim? What if they have no intention of abandoning their old ways, Zorla? What then? Will you allow Earth to be enslaved by your people's hunger for power?" Zorla's tendrils flickered, but she held her ground. "That is the fear of the unknown speaking, General. I cannot speak for every Valforian, but I can speak for myself, and I choose peace." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Captain Kor shifted uncomfortably, her eyes narrowing as she observed the interaction. She had always been a believer in strong defense and decisive action. This negotiation was pushing her to reconsider her views, but doubt still clung to her every thought. One by one, the Valforian Council members spoke up, some in favor of Zorla's vision, others fiercely opposed. It was clear that her plea for peace was not unanimous, but she had made progress. The ideological divide within her people was a dangerous one, and the summit had become a battleground in itself. The humans could not help but feel the weight of this internal struggle. Their decisions would either stabilize or fracture the fragile alliance they were trying to form. Eric leaned over to Elian, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure how much longer we can hold this together. The factions are at a breaking point." Elian glanced at Zorla, his eyes filled with concern. "We have to keep pushing. We can't let fear win. We have to convince them that a future built on cooperation is worth more than one forged through control." As the hours passed, the summit grew more heated. Arguments became louder, and the walls of the chamber seemed to close in on them. The fate of the negotiations seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. But just as it seemed as though the discussion might break into chaos, Zorla stood tall again, her glowing presence filling the room with a quiet resolve. "I understand the fear that runs through you all," Zorla said, her voice steady and commanding. "Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control. But I ask you to consider this: a future where we stand together, as equals, is far stronger than one where we are divided. The Valforians have a history of conquest, but we can choose a different path. It is not easy, and it will take time, but we must take the first step." A silence fell over the room. It was a moment of reckoning. General Trent, whose expression had hardened throughout the summit, finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. I don't know if I believe you," he said, his tone less forceful. "But perhaps after all this time, it's worth considering." The room held its breath. For a moment, it seemed as if Zorla's plea had begun to sway even the most hardened voices. But before any further words could be exchanged, a low rumble shook the station. The walls trembled and alarms blared. Everyone stood frozen, looking around in confusion. Zorla's eyes widened. "It's a Valthorian ship. It's not ours." The door to the summit chamber burst open, and a group of armed soldiers stormed in. They were Valthorian, but not the peaceful faction Zorla represented. Their armor was dark and menacing, and their eyes burned with a fanatical intensity. They had come for control. "We will not let you negotiate away our power," one of the soldiers shouted, raising a weapon toward the gathered leaders. In an instant, chaos erupted. Captain Kor moved with lightning speed, pulling her sidearm and aiming at the invaders. Eric, Elian, and Zorla all reacted in sync, instinctively working together to defend themselves. But it wasn't just a battle of weapons. It was a battle for the future. As the skirmish raged on, Zorla made a split-second decision. "I can stop them," she whispered, stepping forward toward the intruders. Her bioluminescent tendrils began to glow fiercely, illuminating the chamber in a brilliant blaze. "But I need you to trust me." Elian grabbed her arm. "Are you sure?" Zorla nodded, her voice steady. "This is the moment. The factions within my people must understand the cost of war." With a single pulse of energy, Zorla sent out a wave of telepathic force, overwhelming the invaders. Their weapons dropped, and their minds were flooded with images of destruction, pain, and the ruins of a galaxy ravaged by endless conflict. It was a vision of what could happen if they chose to continue down the path of domination. The soldiers hesitated, their resolve cracking. Zorla's voice rang out, not just in their minds, but in the hearts of every person in the room. "Choose peace," she said, her words resonating deep within their beings. "Choose a future where no one has to fear the unknown. Let go of control and embrace unity." The tension in the room was palpable. Then, slowly, the soldiers lowered their weapons. I choose peace," one of them muttered, his voice shaking. It was the turning point. The Valthorian factions who had long pursued power began to reconsider their position. The human delegates, once wary and fearful, began to see the possibility of a shared future. As the summit concluded, a fragile agreement was reached. The road ahead would be long, but it was one that Zorla and the humans, Eric, Elian, and even Captain Kor, had chosen to walk together. And in that moment, Zorla knew that, though the battle for peace had only just begun, it was a fight worth waging. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to create a future built on trust, cooperation, and understanding. The stars above them, once symbols of vast, indifferent space, now seemed to glow brighter, as if reflecting the promise of a new beginning.